I need to read the skill file and then write the story. Let me check the names to avoid, then write the story directly. The names to avoid: Daniel Croft, Eli, Marcus, Renee, Avery, Theo, Nathan, Stephanie, Gerald Holt, Jade, Dwight, Calvin, Daniel, Owen, Brendan Scholl, Petra Schilling, Gordon, Cody, Ray, Carol, Arthur, Victor, Sylvia, Walt, Harold Finch, Warren, Pam, Kevin, Lorraine, Raymond, Frederick. Now writing the story with new names. I'll use narrator, unnamed / son equals Miles, daughter-in-law equals Diane, her mother equals Phyllis, her father equals Bert, nurse equals June, doctor equals Dr. Calloway, attorney equals Mr. Hargrove, granddaughter equals unnamed at first. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who sneaks through a hospital at 2 in the morning. I'm 63 years old. I coached Little League for 11 years. I drove a school bus for 26. I am not a dramatic person. I am not someone who looks for trouble, but I am someone who knows his son's handwriting. And when I held that note, 4 words on the back of a receipt, shoved under my windshield wiper in the hospital parking garage, I stopped being the quiet man I'd always been. The note said, "They moved my room." That was it. That was all. 4 words. But I knew it was for Miles because he always printed his 7s with a little crossbar through the middle, the way his grandfather taught him when he was 7 years old. And I stood in that parking garage holding a gas station receipt, and I felt something cold move through my chest. That had nothing to do with the November air. Let me go back. Let me start where this actually started. Because if I just tell you about the hospital, you won't understand what I was really up against. Miles is my only child. His mother, my wife Connie, passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer, 2 years from diagnosis to gone. It was Miles who sat with me in the waiting rooms. It was Miles who drove me home when I couldn't see straight from crying. He was 22 years old, and he never flinched. Not once. He just held my hand in that ugly beige hallway and said, "Dad, we're going to be okay." I believed him then. I still believe him. That's the kind of man my son is. He met Diane at a work conference about 4 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, laughed at the right moments. I tried to like her. I did like her at first. What I didn't like, and I want to be careful here because I am trying to tell this as honestly as I can, was her family. Her mother, Phyllis, had a way of looking at me like I was furniture in a room she was about to redecorate. Her father, Bert, asked me within 10 minutes of meeting me what my retirement portfolio looked like. He said it like he was making conversation. He wasn't making conversation. He was taking inventory. They had money. Old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, but somehow always does. A big house on the north side of town. A lake cottage 2 hours east. A son-in-law, Diane's brother Hank, who was a property attorney and who wore cufflinks to casual Sunday dinners. They were not bad people exactly. They were just the kind of people who organized the world by usefulness. And I was not particularly useful to them. Miles and Diane got married 2.5 years ago. Small ceremony, which I thought was Diane's preference. I found out later was Phyllis's preference. She wanted a bigger wedding, but not with my side of the family in it, and a small wedding was the compromise. I found that out much later. At the time, I just wore my good suit and danced with Diane at the reception, and told myself I was being paranoid. They bought a house about 40 minutes from me. Miles called every Sunday. We had dinner together once or twice a month. It wasn't perfect. Diane could be cold, could make me feel like a guest at my son's home. But it was manageable. It was manageable. It was fine. People make compromises for the people they love. I understood that. Then about 14 months ago, Miles had the accident. He was driving home from a job site. He does construction project management, and a truck ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. He was alive when they pulled him out. He was in surgery for 6 hours. When they finally let someone see him, it was Diane who went in. I sat in the waiting room with my hat in my hands for 4 hours before a nurse came and told me he was stable. I asked when I could see him. The nurse looked uncomfortable. She said she'd have to check with the family. I said I was family. She said she understood, but the patient's wife had requested that visitors be limited for now, for medical reasons, and she was very sorry. I sat back down. I told myself it made sense. He'd just come out of surgery. He needed rest. I told myself a lot of things in that waiting room, and I believed most of them because I am a man who would rather believe something reasonable than sit with something that scares me. That was my mistake. I should have pushed right then. I didn't. For the next 6 weeks, I was allowed to visit Miles exactly 3 times, each time with Diane present, each time for no more than 20 minutes. He was conscious but groggy from medication. He smiled when he saw me. He tried to talk. Diane would answer for him. "He's tired," she'd say. Or the doctor said he shouldn't exert himself. And eventually she'd stand up, and that was the signal that my time was over. I told myself this was grief, that she was scared, and this was how she handled it. I told myself she loved my son and was protecting him. I drove home after each visit and sat at my kitchen table and tried to believe that. Then, the 3rd visit, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was sitting next to his bed. Diane had stepped out to take a phone call. Miles looked at me, really looked at me, not the foggy half look of someone on heavy medication, and he grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, but it was deliberate. He said, "Dad." Just that. Then he glanced at the door and said, "Don't let them." And then Diane walked back in, and he let go and looked at the ceiling and didn't say another word for the rest of the visit. Don't let them. Don't let them what? I drove home shaking. I called the next morning to schedule another visit. Phyllis answered. She had taken to answering Diane's phone, which I had not questioned until that moment, and she told me Miles had been moved to a long-term rehabilitation facility about 2 hours away. She said it was a specialized center, very exclusive, the best care available. She said Diane had made the arrangements. She said Miles was not up for visitors right now, and they would let me know when that changed. She said it the way you tell a child that school is closed for the day. Cheerful, final, case closed. I said I'd like the name and address of the facility. There was a pause. She said she'd have Diane send it to me. Diane never sent it. I waited a week. I called back. I got voicemail. I left 4 messages over 10 days and got 1 text back from Diane that said, "He's doing well, resting. We'll update you soon." That's when I started to understand that this was not grief. This was something else. I want to say something here. To anyone listening who has ever been in this position, who has ever felt like they're going crazy, like maybe they're being too sensitive, like maybe they're the problem, that feeling of doubt, that voice that says you're overreacting, you're making this about you being difficult. That voice is not your conscience. That voice is what people count on to keep you quiet. I know that now. I didn't know it then, but I know it then. But I know it now. I hired a private investigator. His name is not important. What is important is that within 5 days, he had the name and the address of the facility, and the information that Miles had in fact been transferred there, and that his listed emergency contact had been changed from me to Diane, and that a power of attorney document had been filed 2 weeks after the accident, signed by Diane, giving her full legal authority over Miles's medical and financial decisions while he was incapacitated. I read that last part 3 times. Miles had been drifting in and out of consciousness for weeks. There was no way he had signed a power of attorney with full understanding of what he was signing. There was no way. I called a lawyer. His name is Mr. Ten, Hargrove. He's a family law attorney in our county. The kind of man who has seen enough ugliness in the world that nothing surprises him anymore, but who still gets angry about injustice, which I appreciated. He told me what I was up against. He told me that the POA, if validly executed, gave Diane almost total control. He told me we could challenge it, but it would take time. He told me I needed to get eyes on my son. That's when I drove to the facility. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late January. Gray sky, sleet coming down sideways. The place looked expensive. Brick building, manicured shrubs. The kind of place that had a fountain in the lobby even in winter. I went to the front desk and said I was there to see my son. I gave his name. The woman at the desk checked her computer and then looked at me with that particular expression I had come to recognize. That "I'm sorry but my hands are tied" expression. And she told me that Miles had a restricted visitor list and my name was not on it. I asked to speak with the director. She said the director was unavailable. I asked to speak with his doctor. She said she couldn't share medical information with non-authorized contacts. I said, very quietly, that I was his father, and I was standing in this lobby, and I was not leaving without seeing my son. She called security, not aggressively, politely, the way you call maintenance when a light flickers. A young man in a gray uniform came and stood near me, and the woman at the desk said she was very sorry and she hoped I understood. I left. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and I gripped the steering wheel and I breathed. Then I noticed something. The facility was shaped like an L. The main entrance was on the short end of the L. The longer part of the building ran back along a side street, and there were windows, patient room windows, and some of them had lights on even though it was the middle of the afternoon. I drove around to the side street, and I parked, and I looked at those windows, and I thought about what I was willing to do. I am 63 years old. I drove a school bus for 26 years. I am not a dramatic person. But that was my son in there. I came back that night, 11:30, the parking lot mostly empty. I had called the facility earlier and, pretending to be a vendor confirming a delivery, gotten the name of the night shift charge nurse. Her name was June. I walked in through the side entrance. It was a fire exit that had been propped open. Whether by accident or by someone taking a smoke break, I don't know. And I walked down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and floor wax. And I found the nurse's station, and I asked for June. She was a small woman, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at me the way people look at you when you appear somewhere you shouldn't be. Not afraid, exactly. Evaluating. I told her who I was. I told her all of it, quickly and quietly. I showed her a photograph of me and Miles at a baseball game 3 summers ago. I showed her the text messages he had sent me in the weeks before the accident. Normal texts, dad joke texts. A voice memo of him laughing at something stupid on television. I showed her who my son was before all of this. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "He asks about you." I had to hold on to the edge of the nurse's station counter. She said, "He's been asking for weeks. Every time I do his evening check, he asks if anyone called. He asked me once if his father knew where he was." I said, "Does he know? Does he understand what's happening?" She said he was much further along in his recovery than the family had been told. She said the lead physician had recommended transitioning him to outpatient therapy 2 weeks ago. She said that recommendation had been, and she paused here, and I could see her choosing her words, not acted upon by the person with medical authority. She looked at me steadily. She said, "I can't tell you anything else officially, but I can tell you that if a patient's father wanted to speak to the attending physician directly, that physician is here until 7 a.m., and his office is at the end of this hall." She looked back down at her paperwork. I walked to the end of the hall. Dr. Timer. Calloway was a tired-looking man with kind eyes and a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Doctor" in faded letters. He let me sit down. He listened, and then he told me, carefully and within what he said were the limits of what he could share without violating patient privacy, that Miles was cognitively intact, that he had been cognitively intact for several weeks, that he had been asking to contact family members, and those requests had been, there was that word again, not acted upon. He said, "Your son is not incapacitated. He has not been incapacitated in the medical sense for some time. Whatever legal arrangements are in place were made under different circumstances." I said, "Can he leave?" Dr. Calloway looked at his coffee mug. He said, "A patient who is legally competent has the right to make decisions about his own care. That is not something a power of attorney supersedes when the patient has regained capacity." He looked at me, but someone would need to explain that to him, and someone would need to be present to help him exercise that right, because the administrative process for something like that can be complicated without support. I went back to the nurse's station. June was still there. She didn't look up. I said, "What room is he in?" She slid a notepad across the counter without looking at me. There was a room number on it. I memorized it. I slid the notepad back. He was awake. It was after midnight, and he was lying there in the dim light looking at the ceiling. And when I pushed the door open and he turned his head and saw me, his face did something I am not able to describe without my voice giving out. He looked like a man who had decided to stop hoping for something and then saw it anyway. I crossed the room and I sat on the edge of his bed and I said, "I got your note." He said, "I paid a food delivery guy $20 to put it on your windshield. I didn't know if it would work." I said, "It worked." He said, "Dad, I need to tell you some things." He talked for almost an hour. about what he had signed in those first blurry days after surgery. Documents he didn't understand, that he was told were standard hospital paperwork, about overhearing conversations through the wall about the estate and the timeline, and making sure things are in order before he's well enough to make trouble. About Diane telling him in a visit 3 weeks ago that I hadn't called, that I hadn't come, that I seemed to have moved on, I put my hand over his and I said, I have been trying to get to you every single day. He said, I know that now. He said, I know. We got him out of there 4 days later. Mr. Person, Hargrove filed an emergency motion challenging the validity of the POA on the grounds that Miles had since regained legal capacity, which Dr. Calloway was willing to document in writing. The facility, once presented with the legal paperwork, had no grounds to hold a competent adult who wanted to leave. Diane showed up, with Hank in his cufflinks, but there was nothing they could do. Miles signed his own discharge papers with a hand that was steadier than I expected. He looked at Diane in that hallway. He looked at her for a long time. He didn't say anything angry. He just said, I know what you were waiting for. She said that wasn't true. He said, I heard the conversations, Diane. I was sick, not deaf. Hank started to say something about defamation, and Miles just walked past him, slowly with his cane, and he didn't look back. The legal process took the better part of a year. What came out in court was worse than I had let myself imagine. The power of attorney, it turned out, had been obtained through a notary who was a friend of Bert's. The signatures witnessed under conditions that Miles's lawyer argued were coercive. There was documentation of Diane's communications with the financial advisor about restructuring Miles's assets, begun while he was still in the ICU. There were text messages between Diane and Phyllis about the window closing if Miles recovered too quickly. They had been counting on him not getting better. And this is the part that still makes me go cold, on him getting better without me there to tell him what his rights were. Diane did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that. The financial fraud charges were ultimately settled civilly. She lost access to the joint accounts, she lost the house, which was in both their names, and she paid a substantial penalty. Hank lost his notary certification. Bert and Phyllis were not charged but were named in the civil suit, and the judgment was not kind to them. Miles divorced Diane. It took time. He had a lot of untangling to do, not just legally, but in every other way. The kind of untangling that happened slowly, over dinners at my kitchen table and long phone calls and Sunday afternoons that look exactly like Sunday afternoons used to look before everything went wrong. He started seeing a therapist. He started going back to job sites. He started laughing at dumb things on television again and sending me voice memos of it, and I can't tell you how much that meant. I can't tell you. There is something I want to say before I finish, because I think about this often. I am not a hero in this story. I drove a school bus. I coached Little League. I am a man who almost talked himself out of pushing back, who almost believed the reasonable explanations, who almost convinced himself that he was being dramatic. What made the difference was not courage exactly. It was 4 words on the back of a gas station receipt. It was a nurse who slid a notepad across the counter without looking up. It was a tired doctor with a faded coffee mug who chose his words carefully and trusted me to understand them. People like June exist. People like Dr. Calloway exist. They can't always say what they know, but they can point. They can make space. They can slide a notepad across a counter in the middle of the night and trust you to know what it means. Pay attention to the notepads. Pay attention to the hands that reach for your wrist. Pay attention to 4 words that don't make sense until suddenly they're the only thing that does. My son is sitting in my living room right now as I record this. He's watching football and eating the leftover chili I made yesterday, and he just yelled something at the TV that I am not going to repeat. He walks with a slight limp that the doctors say may always be there. He is 34 years old, and he is the finest person I know, and he is right there, 20 feet away, and I am the luckiest man I know. If you are watching this and something doesn't feel right, in your family, with someone you love, with a situation that keeps having reasonable explanations that somehow don't add up, I am telling you from the other side of it, trust the thing that feels wrong. Push the door open, make the phone call. Drive to the facility in the sleet at 11:30 at night if you have to. The people who are counting on your silence are counting on it for a reason. Don't give it to them. If this story reached you tonight, Wherever you are, I hope you leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it. You never know whose windshield it might land on. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not just the facts of it, but the shape of it. The way it started and the way it ended, and what it cost everyone involved to get there. Diane didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel. That's what I've come to believe anyway. What she decided, at some point, maybe slowly, maybe all at once, when she saw how vulnerable Miles was in that hospital bed, was that her own security mattered more than his. She made a calculation. She looked at a man she had promised to stand beside, and she decided he was more valuable as an asset than as a husband, and every choice after that flowed from that first one. The restricted visitor list, the power of attorney, the phone calls about the window closing. One thing led to the next, the way these things always do. Because a decision like that doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It requires more decisions just like it to hold itself together. That's the part people don't always reckon with. It's not that the consequences caught up with her. It's that she built the consequences herself, brick by brick, every time she chose to go further instead of stopping. Hank lost his notary certification because he helped her. Bert and Phyllis sat in a courtroom and heard their family name attached to words like coercive and bad faith because they thought their money made them untouchable. Every single outcome in this story was a direct result of a choice someone made. That's not fate. That's just how actions work. And on the other side of that, June sliding a notepad across a counter in the middle of the night. Dr. Calloway choosing his words carefully but choosing them. Mr. Hargrove picking up the phone and saying, "Here's what we can do." Miles paying a food delivery driver $20 and folding a note and hoping it would reach me. Small acts. Ordinary people making ordinary decisions to do the right thing when it would have been easier and safer to look the other way. Those choices had consequences too. They led somewhere too. What I keep coming back to is this. At every point in the story, someone had a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a movie choice. A quiet, everyday choice about what kind of person they were going to be in the next 5 minutes. Diane had those choices. June had those choices. I had them too. Every time I almost talk myself out of pushing back. Intelligence matters. Knowing your rights. Knowing the questions to ask. Knowing when a reasonable explanation is being used to manage you rather than inform you. That's not paranoia. That's wisdom. And it's something you build deliberately by paying attention to the world and refusing to be comfortable with things that don't add up. Miles knew something was wrong. He couldn't prove it, couldn't articulate it in those foggy first weeks. But he knew. He held on to that. He used what little he had, a $20 bill and a gas station receipt, and he trusted that it would be enough. Persistence is the other thing. Not aggression, not drama. Just the steady refusal to accept a door closing as the end of the conversation. I drove back to that facility in the sleep. I found the side entrance. I asked for June by name. None of that was brave. It was just one more step taken by a man who had run out of willingness to stand still. My son is 34 years old, and he is in my living room right now. That's where all of it ends up. And an ordinary Tuesday evening, chili on the stove, football on television, a father and a son in the same house. I don't take a single second of it for granted, not one.